Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammang sanghang namasami. So good evening again, everyone. And this is the time for me to say a few words on Dharma. And yeah, I first of all want to say how lovely it is to sit together, how really helpful it is to sit together, how valuable it feels to me that we spend our time silently, just, present together, because there's a sort of strengthening for me in a group sangha, group situation. So opportunities to sit together, opportunities to do retreat, really precious and helpful, supportive. I don't know about you all, but if I sit on my own, I'm much more inclined to fidget, to get distracted, to have those really urgent thoughts about having to do this, that, or the other, and actually following them sometimes, which is ludicrous, because we can all spare half an hour, 10 minutes, an hour, hours, ideally, actually giving time for practice, giving time to free ourselves from suffering. There's nothing more important than that. There's nothing really terrifically urgent, except for that. The Buddha said, he said, we should meditate, we should practice mindfulness as if our head is on fire, our hair is on fire, or our house is on fire. Different similes he gave for the sense of what's actually really important here is to get out of the burning house, to put out the fire. It's really very, 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 if anything's urgent, then this spiritual quest, this spiritual path is urgent. And that's very interesting, isn't it? Because we might think, no, that there are actually some things that are much more important than that. What if something happens to somebody? We have to go out there and, look after people, or make good things happen, avoid bad things happening, and so forth. But in the bigger picture, even life and death, we feel, because we have this world that we live in, this world that we inhabit, which is so self-referencing for us. It's my life, my body, my family, my past and my future. We give a lot of importance to these things, and the Buddha's really saying to us, think again. Think again, because these are not as important as karma and the work we can do to free up and to liberate the heart. Now, this is actually much more significant, because the Buddha is telling us countless lifetimes have happened here. This is one more chapter in a very, very long book, like volumes and volumes. And so what seems so compelling and so urgent and so important in our lives, all respect to that, but actually, no, it's not, that's not what's so important for us. What's really important for us is to look in here and find our redemption, let salvation manifest. I love these words. I think these words are kind of, they have Christian connotations maybe for many of us, salvation and redemption, but this is a path of salvation. It's a path of redemption. It's a path of freeing ourselves from all the dukkha, all the suffering, all the all the sources of confusion and despair and sadness and, you know, really distraction from what's true and what's real. And yeah, I really like the word redemption. I like the word salvation. I like the fact that we can, through our practice, really turn things around in such an extraordinary way, you know. Yeah. In the Buddha's time, you know, there were people who had really seriously hurt and harmed others, aren't there? You probably all heard of Angulimala, for instance. You all heard of the story of Angulimala? Okay, oh, I'll tell you then. You know, this is a great example of redemption, of, you know, it's encouraging us, because Angulimala was quite a dark character. And, you know, we may feel that we have done some bad things. We may feel guilty about things that we've done in life. And actually, when we practice, these things will often come to the forefront for us until we've made peace with them. You know, all the sources of guilt and shame and kind of like knots in our being, like dark corners or a sense of something wrong in here, in the mind, in the body. We all have these kind of experiences, because whether in this lifetime or even in previous lifetimes, there's an accumulation of karma, of unfinished business, and it can feel really sometimes very unsavory for us. We can feel there's something wrong with me, you know, there's something wrong in here. And this example of Angulimala then is a great teaching for us, because Angulimala was what we would now call a serial killer. He was this is, you know, apparently was the case, that he went around killing people, and he would cut off their fingers, and he made a necklace of the fingers of all the people that he'd murdered. So he comes across as a really macabre, really sinister psychopath, you know. But actually there's a in the commentaries to the sutta, I'm referring to a sutta in Majjhima Nikaya, Angulimala Sutta, where the story of Angulimala is told, you know. But there are commentaries about the story that give different kind of angles to it. So according to some of the commentaries, Angulimala was actually a really good person. He was a spiritual seeker, and he had a spiritual teacher. And he was so kind of such an exemplary student. He was so loved by his teacher that the other students became very jealous of him, and they deceived him. They told him that his teacher wanted him to go and murder 1,000 people as a spiritual practice, and this was going to be of benefit in some way. It seems a bit bizarre, doesn't it? It seems a bit ridiculous. I mean, who would fall for that? But whatever. Angulimala felt then possibly that he was doing something beneficial in some way in the bigger picture. Actually, reflecting on this, you know, we can appreciate how people who do hideous things, horrible things to each other, to others, often have a sense of a motivation that has some kind of rather maybe convoluted sometimes, you know, maybe confused, but some kind of reasoning behind it. So there's some bigger picture in which this hideous action, harmful actions, sort of have a place. And, you know, you can just refer that to any situation going on in the world around us, really, where people do harmful things, really hugely harmful things, but there'll be some sort of reason for that in their mind, in their heart. There's some sort of overarching necessity for this to happen. There's some good, in short. There's some good reason for things to happen. To be harming and hurting and destroying and, you know, obliterating other people. there'll be some sort of motivation behind that that has a wholesome feeling to it for the person who's involved. And that's quite interesting for us to consider, isn't it? So Angulimala in this sutta, in the commentary at least, he's described as somebody who was killing people for some sort of spiritual sense of a spiritual reason behind it, to please his teacher, his revered teacher. Who knows? In the sutta itself, this isn't mentioned, so it's just something we can maybe take or leave as a contemplation. Could there be some ways in which people feel that their motivation is not necessarily unwholesome, even when very unwholesome acts are perpetrated? The other commentarial addition to the sutta, before I launch into the story of Angulimala, is that in the commentary it says, well, Angulimala had killed 999 people, and he was keeping tabs on how many people he'd killed, because he had his necklace of fingers. So there were 999 fingers. He had one to go. He had one person to go, and then he would be able to finish this particular task that he had. And the Buddha saw with his divine eye that the 1,000th person who was approaching Angulimala that day was actually his mother. His mother was coming along the road where he was hiding in the forest. And the Buddha knew that if Angulimala saw her, he would have no qualms whatsoever, because this would be his 1,000th victim. And in fact, the Buddha saw that for him to have killed his mother would have been a really heinous crime. And it's one of the heinous crimes that sources of bad karma that prevent a person from becoming liberated in this lifetime. So the Buddha said in another place that there are 5 things that if we do them, we can't possibly become enlightened in this lifetime. Not to say that we can't become enlightened in future lifetimes, just not in this particular lifetime. And those heinous acts are to kill one's father, to kill one's mother, to kill an arahant, to harm a Buddha, to cause harm to a Buddha, or to cause a schism in the Sangha, to cause a rift in the Sangha. So these are the really appalling acts that really just sort of take us down so far that we can't redeem ourselves. There's no redemption in this lifetime. So if that's the case, the commentary tells us the Buddha found it important to go and visit Angulimala. In the sutta, there's no mention of Angulimala's mother. There's no mention of the number of people that he's killed, and there's no mention of his mission. Just that he's a serial killer who hangs out in the forest, and he, seeks victims. And in the sutta, we're told that people are so terrified of him that they go around in big groups. And we can relate this again to our own time, because I remember when I was a student, there was actually a serial killer at large in the area where I was a student in England. And you'd hear about these murders, and people were very frightened. And it was usually women it was always women that were being killed. And we used to go around in groups so that we weren't going to be in danger. And so in the time of Angulimala, people were going around in groups. And as we're told in the sutta, this didn't deter Angulimala from his murder spree. In fact, he just killed the whole group. So he somehow had the ability, strength, weaponry to kill large numbers of people. And the king of the country, King Pasenadi of Kosala, was hunting him down, trying to catch him, but to no avail. And so this was the kind of climate, the kind of environment at that time. The Buddha came along one morning, and he sought out Angulimala. And he's walking along a road and meeting people along the road, farmers, cattle herders, wanderers, travelers, and they're all saying to him, don't go that way. You can't go that way. That's where Angulimala is. You need to stop and come away. And the Buddha just didn't say anything, just carried on walking towards Angulimala. And in the sutta we're told this happened 2 times, 3 times, but the Buddha just keeps going. And in the end, he's on his own on the road. And sure enough, Angulimala sees him. And Angulimala is amazed to see this person, absolutely astonished to see somebody on his own without any kind of weapon. So he's a little bit taken aback, but he very quickly decides that, of course, the thing to do is to kill him. And so he starts pursuing the Buddha. And the Buddha was able to prevent Angulimala from catching up with him. The impression Angulimala gets is that the Buddha just keeps going faster and faster and faster. And the faster Angulimala runs to catch the Buddha, the faster he's moving away. And he calls out to the Buddha, stop, stop. And the Buddha replies, I have stopped, and now you should stop as well. Angulimala was really taken aback by this. Firstly, that this person was so calm that he couldn't reach this person. And then the statement that was made, I've stopped already. You should also stop. And he thought to himself, we're told in the sutta, he thought to himself, this person is a monk, he's a samana, he's a spiritual person. He wouldn't be lying to me. They don't tell lies, these people. So what does he mean? And so Angulimala was intrigued enough to actually ask the Buddha, what are you talking about? What do you mean? You're moving so fast. What do you mean to say that you've stopped? And the Buddha replied to Angulimala saying, I've stopped hurting or harming, and you should stop as well. And at which point Angulimala fell on his knees and he cast aside all his weapons and bowed to the Buddha. And he just acknowledged that someone's come into my hell realm that I'm in. This isn't what he said. I'm just interpreting what happened. Someone's come into this place of violence and harm and hurt, and completely calmly given me a teaching that I can actually understand. I can actually understand this is what I need to do. And immediately Angulimala had a change of heart, and he asked the Buddha if he could ordain as a monk on the spot. And it's curious in the sutta that it seems that this is allowed. The Buddha immediately ordained him. Normally the Buddha would say, okay, you have to go and get some robes, and you have to go and get a bowl, and then you can come back and I'll ordain you. And he'd say this to the best of people. They'd have to kind of get the accoutrements of the monk or the nun before they could be ordained. But in this case, it didn't happen. It may be that a little section's missing from the sutta, or it may be that there's a reason for that. And I like to think maybe there's a reason for that, which is that it needs to happen quickly for this person. And in the commentary, it says Angulimala had such good karma from the past that he was able to ordain immediately. So who knows? But this is what happened. And the Buddha took Angulimala with him, and he just kept him by his side. And they walked all the way from where the Buddha had gone to find Angulimala. He'd walked a considerable distance from Savatthi to the Kosalan country, long way to find Angulimala. And so he took him back to Savatthi, which was a very established monastery and a place where the Buddha spent a lot of time, We even know that this meeting, this ordination happened in the 20th year of the Buddha's ministry. So he was 55 years old, the Buddha. And he brought this young man, Angulimala, along with him back to Savatthi to stay in the monastery with him. And people got to hear about it. They got to hear that the crazed Angulimala, Anguli means finger, and Mala means necklace, garland. The crazy garland of fingers was with the Buddha in Savatthi. People got to know. And the king of Kosala brought along a kind of army to come to the monastery to confront this serial killer, and came to the Buddha and said, is he here? The Buddha said, yes, he's right here. And he just pointed to him. He's sitting just like Seminary Satajivi sitting next to me. He said, yes, here he is. And the king was terrified because of the stories about this mass murderer, and quite disturbed. And the Buddha reassured him very quickly and said, it's perfectly safe. Now he's a monk. He's completely harmless. How would you like to relate to him? And the Buddha asked the king. Now the King Pasenadi was a disciple of the Buddha, a faithful disciple. And so he knew how to respond. And you can imagine, huge crowd of people, everyone listening, everyone attending to the king. And he said, well, if he's become a bhikkhu, then I will pay respects to him and I'll see if there's anything I can offer him. And the Buddha said, very good. And so King Pasenadi sort of then set the tone, and Angulimala was protected. And he offered him if he needed any requisites. Angulimala refused just because he was doing ascetic practices and he had what he needed as a bhikkhu. So he said, I'm okay, I don't need anything. He changed his name. The Buddha gave him a new name. So he was the garland of fingers. And when he became a bhikkhu, his name was Ahimsako. Ahimsa is harmless. Yeah, himsa is harming. Himsati is to kill or to harm. And so his name was Ahimsako, one who is harmless. So how amazing this complete radical transformation that happened and was enabled by the Buddha. And actually the sutta goes on to tell us about this monk Ahimsako going for alms in the village, in the town. One day he sees a pregnant lady and she's struggling to give birth, or perhaps he heard about it, but anyway, he knew this was happening, and he had a lot of compassion, and he really wanted to do something to help. And he went back and told the Buddha about it. What can we do for this poor lady struggling to give birth? Something terribly wrong, she may die, the baby may die. And the Buddha said, oh, very good. Well, you go back and tell her, by the power of the truth of this, I have harmed nobody. I'm a harmless person. Through the power of that truth, may you be well. And Ahimsako said, but Lord, I've actually killed all these people. How can I say that? How can I make a vow like that? And the Buddha said, well, you can recollect that from the time that you became a disciple of mine, you've been completely harmless. You've hurt or harmed no being. Through the power of that truth, may you be well. May you and your baby be well. And so Ahimsako went back and said this to the pregnant lady. He connected with her and he made his vow, his great declaration of truth. And in Buddhism, this comes again and again in the suttas, that one can make a proclamation of goodness, of truth, and that this can be a great blessing to people. And in this case, Angulimala, Ahimsako made this proclamation, and she was able to give birth, and the child was okay. And even to this day, we have a chant that we do for pregnant women giving birth. There's a chant that we can do, which is relating to this story of Ahimsako. And so it's very touching, really, isn't it? That of all the people to make this vow and to heal through the power of his declaration of harmlessness, it's the ex-serial killer who is able to do this and to heal through the power of his harmlessness. So such a for me important story, really, for us all to be able to put into perspective, you know, our sense of wrongdoing, our sense of guilt, any sense of holding on to past wrongs, you know. And maybe we could even say holding on to past wrongs that we feel we may have done, or past wrongs that we feel have been done to us, you know. See how the holding on to these things is completely unnecessary, unhelpful. I spoke the other day about Hiri and Otapa, these qualities, these spiritual qualities of shame and fear of wrongdoing, and how valuable they are, how they're the guardians of the temple, you know. They're like devas, they're like angels, these qualities that we have, the ability to learn from our mistakes, but to hold on to our mistakes and to feel that they define us, to feel that we are unable to change, we can't move forward. This is not helpful. This is not very, it's just not the way of things. And there is incredible transformation that's possible for us. And there's nothing that we've done that prevents us from actually pursuing the spiritual path and taking it all the way to its conclusion, which is freedom from all the sources of suffering. So I find that really powerful and really helpful, because sometimes one can feel, oh, I can't get beyond this, you know, this is too much, it's too big, it keeps coming up, you know, some sense of remembering something that we might have done or something that might have been done to us. It's too much, I can't get over this. I'm traumatized for life. And this is simply a thought that we can then let go of, and to just open to the possibility that all things can unravel, all things can find their peace. There's nothing that we've done or that anyone else has done that is impossible to overcome, to move through, to forgive, not to forget, but to understand and to come to a place of peace with. And, you know, Angulimala, as was Ahimsako, the monk, had a very difficult time, you know, as a monk, because he would go on the alms round and people would be throwing things at him, beating him up, breaking his bowl, tearing his robes. He had to put up with a lot of abuse. But as the Buddha said, you know, this is, if you hadn't become a monk, and indeed, if you've not become an arahant, so and this person became fully liberated. Having killed many people, he was able to still nevertheless become an arahant in the same lifetime. The Buddha said to him, having become a fully liberated person, you would have, if you'd not done the spiritual work, if you'd not freed your heart from this bad karma, you would have been burning in hell for many, many, many eons. But because you were able to understand and let go of this suffering, then this is all you have to put up with. So bear up. So bear up, you know. This is really very fine. It's very much okay. And of course, as an arahant, presumably Ahimsako would have been able to, you know, very skillfully manage, deal with, bear with, patiently endure any and every kind of abuse or violence towards himself, towards the body. And so, you know, people can't necessarily always move forward with us when we free ourselves, when we're able to move beyond past trauma, past unfortunate things that have happened for us, around us, or to us, or within us. Not everybody may be able to move forward with us, but we can certainly free ourselves and let go, you know, let go of the knots, let go of the blockages, let go of the dark areas in the heart. And how do we do that? How do we move forward? It's by seeing, it's by understanding, it's by feeling, you know, and unraveling, in the sense, I mean, understanding our motivations, understanding how we were deluded in the past or others have been deluded, how things come to be, and how we can, through seeing, through understanding the way things happen for us and others, we can then begin to make peace with, you know, just making peace with, just letting things be, and all the processes that that entails, which can be multi-layered, can't they? And over time, you know, the different emotions we may feel if we've been hurt or harmed, or if we feel we've wronged others in some way, you know, it's a whole process of a sort of opening up, like opening up a Pandora's box, you know, and just being able and willing to feel what we feel and atone through fully experiencing what's happened for us. And part of that, of course, is also really opening to the effect our behaviors might have had on others, you know, or if something's happened to us, some traumatic thing has happened to us, to put ourselves in the shoes of the other person. You know, what was happening for them? How could this happen? How could they do what they did? And so this kind of investigation can happen for us, and it's rich and it's deep, and the sort of ripples can spread into every aspect of our lives, and we can understand other people when we have some situation that we're dealing with, some difficult, painful situation, with a feeling of blame or a feeling of guilt. As we work through these things, we can recognize that everybody else has the same kinds of issues also. In fact, we're all kind of working with all the time, you know, you could say the dark side, the difficult side, you know, the winter in the heart, the truckload of manure, as Ajahn Brahm said. Who brought this truckload of manure? You know, the compost, digging through the compost, you know. This is part of our practice. This is part of our experience, isn't it? And it's not to feel that we are particularly afflicted, you know, because shameful, difficult, painful things tend to isolate us in a way, make us feel that we couldn't possibly join the human family, you know, be part of the human community, not with what I've done or not with what's been done to me. And that's just so important for us then to recognize that everyone's in the same boat, you know, and actually working with the feelings layer by layer, the memories, the experiences that we've had that may be difficult or dark. We get to recognize that. We get to recognize that, yeah, other people are dealing with these things also, and we can even share our experiences. And how helpful is that for other people? To hear about Angulimala, for instance, to read this sutta. When I read this sutta, it made a big difference to me. I felt, well, anything's possible. Even I can be liberated then. If he could be liberated, if a serial killer who's said to have killed 999 people can be completely free from suffering in the very same lifetime, then maybe I've got a chance. Maybe I can actually make something of this path and really, really move out of all the holding to suffering that I'm noticing is going on here. And so I feel that to share, if we have been through difficult experiences, or we have done things that we feel really like very, very difficult to come to terms with, to be able to share and hear from others and open up, the tangled web of suffering is really hugely valuable and humbling, yes, humbling. And, the funny thing is that we can feel we have to look a certain way to be in control or to be, a sort of upright person. But when we actually reveal our difficulties and share our sense of past guilt or shame, or share our vulnerability, or share our traumas that we're working with, how amazingly heart-opening it is, isn't it? And other people can relax and feel, yes, I also have my difficulties, and we somehow feel closer, more connected, more intimately. We're in the same boat, on the same journey, walking the same path. The human heart is, to really allow ourselves to be fully human with all the flaws and faults and, habits and fears and, all the vulnerability that we have, to be able to allow all of that. This is Sangha, really brings us together. We're all able to breathe a bit deeper when we hear about each other's difficulties. And so this story, for me, the story of the great redemption, the person who could turn things around so dramatically, it's a very hopeful story. It's a very heartwarming story. And I remember when I was a Goenka student before I became a nun, and I was at the Goenka Center in India, and we heard about this big prison in Delhi called Tihar Jail, and they were able to actually start teaching 10-day Goenka courses at the prison. And over time, they were able to actually develop a meditation center within the prison. It's a huge jail. There's thousands and thousands of inmates. And so they could start to offer meditation retreats for anyone who wanted to do a retreat. And it just grew and grew. It was absolutely remarkable. And people were able to really understand the teachings of the Buddha and practice. And they would interview prisoners. They made a movie about it, and they had various people who'd been in the prison and come in contact with Dharma through their prison life. And then they eventually got out of prison. And some of them were in prison still, long sentences, and giving interviews. And basically, the sense was that the darker a corner one is in, the more appreciation for the Dhamma that could be felt, So huge benefits for these people. And they're expressing how remarkable, really, the turnaround could be for them from habits that were so painful, so entrenched, so harmful, to the ability to let go, to grieve and mourn and move through all the terrible thoughts and memories and remorse that came up for them, and to actually slowly but surely let that go and be increasingly freer and lighter. So beautiful. It's a lovely movie to watch. The movie of the Goenka students at Tihar jail. And I believe they're still doing courses there. And people are, you know, they do a lot of research, and it's shown that people really do come out of their habits, harmful habits. And so is it recidivism rate? The rate at which they, you know, this is such an unfortunate truth, isn't it? That people who are habitually hurting and harming themselves in ways that get them arrested and put in jail will tend to continue those behaviours, even after long sentences, even after the horrible experiences of being in prison. They'll go out and get themselves arrested again and commit the same crimes and so forth. But when they have the chance to reflect, to pay attention, and to feel the pain of their situation, and go through all those terrible feelings of shame and remorse, then they tend not to recreate those situations again. So they get out and they do different things. And I remember being at Amaravati and meeting a guy called Richard, who was an American who'd been in and out of jail for most of his life, up until about the age of 30. And he'd do armed robberies. And so he did a lot of time. And he was, you know, very scarred, very bruised and beaten. And he was able to do a meditation course in jail in America. And it turned his whole life around. And he was now coming to monasteries and spending all his time practicing in monasteries and thinking about becoming a monk. And it was awesome to meet him because he was a lovely guy. You couldn't imagine him having really harmed anyone. And I don't think he did harm people terribly. He didn't kill anybody. But he was just addicted to this lifestyle, you know, a very unfortunate lifestyle. And he was able to drop all of that. How difficult to change these kind of habits, how difficult to move away from those relationships and ways of being into something completely different. But how wonderful to know that that's possible. Meeting someone like that was really amazing for me, to see how much is possible when we simply sit and observe what's happening here. That's all it takes. It's all it takes. And then it's like you open the lid, don't you, and out it all comes. And we can be shocked sometimes by what's in here. You know, it can be quite shocking. But let's remember Angulimala. Remember that there's nothing we can't overcome. There's no trauma, there's no guilt, there's nothing we've done in this life that cannot be overcome, and we can turn everything around. And I'm sure none of you are serial killers, and, you know, I'm sure that none of you have done anything really heinous, but nevertheless, I certainly can recognize that I carried a lot of guilt in my being around things that I'd said and done, and behaviors. And, you know, it's hard to face those things, but facing those things is the first step in changing our habits and easily, you know, developing more sila, developing more goodness, and recognizing how does that feel for us, you know, to refine our behavior, how good it feels. And so we all have opportunities, don't we, to move from darkness towards brightness, to lighten our load, to face dukkha, and to, through understanding it, to come to the real letting go, moving through to peace, to happiness, to well-being, to a light heart, a happy heart, to liberation from all suffering. So I think I'll stop there. Ewan.
Andamayanga Makataya Sadhu Karanda say Sadhu, Sadhu, Sadhu.
So we have a little bit of time. If anyone would like to come in with any Further reflections, thoughts, questions? Sangamita.
Like you, I love this story in combination with the story of the woman who lost her husband and her children, her parents, in over a couple of days, and the story of the woman who became psychotic when her child died. Because all of these stories are just talking about extremely extreme circumstances. And so it is very encouraging. Like, we can't make any excuses as to why we personally cannot follow the path, because all of these people had these extremely difficult life circumstances, and yet they all became arahats.
Samadhi. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't know if you all know the other stories. The story of the lady who lost 2 children and a husband on a journey, and her parents died at the same time. So how much can we lose, and all her losses happening in such a very short time were, hugely, obviously impactful for her. And then Kisagotami, whose baby died, and she was unable to accept the fact that her baby was no longer alive. And so she's carrying it around with her, and she goes to the Buddha and begs him to do something to bring her baby back to life. It's just so heartrending, isn't it? You can just imagine how it is for somebody to lose a child. Actually, you can't imagine. I think those of you who've lost a child know, and can probably relate very well to this story. But for the rest of us, it's the heart really quivers with the empathy for that person. And she goes to the Buddha, and he doesn't say, he doesn't try and tell her that the child is dead, or you must accept reality. No, he very, very skillfully says to her, okay, I can help you. I can help you. He says, go round the town and knock on every door for me. And I want you to collect a mustard seed from the house, any house where nobody has died. So you have to ask them, has anyone died in this house? And if nobody's died at any time, then you can get a mustard seed, and then you can bring it to me. Collect the mustard seeds for me. And so she goes through this process. You just imagine going around the whole town, knocking on every door, having conversations with people. Has anyone died in this house? Oh yes, well, so-and-so died, and my mother died recently, and all the stories and all the sharing that would have happened for her. And slowly, house after house after house, it dawns on her gradually. Okay, yeah, there's no house where nobody's died. And so she was able to let go of the baby, the dead baby, and she became a practitioner. She became a bhikkhuni. I think she became an arahant. Yeah. Very touching stories. They're so helpful, aren't they? They really are. Yeah. Anybody else like to come in with anything? Millie has a question. Go ahead, Millie.
Just more of a comment. I just wanted to thank you, and it's such a timely talk because I came back from my first Vipassana retreat on Sunday, and that was just a brand new experience for me. And the first time I heard a couple of these stories, and I have been feeling like, how am I going to transition back into my day-to-day life? And this group is just so wonderful because it's just carrying on. And so I just want to say how much I appreciate it. And thank you.
Thank you, Millie. You're really welcome. I'm so delighted to hear that you've just done a 10-day course, and how wonderful that you notice indeed it carries on, and to keep going with a daily practice, like morning and evening practice, to allow this process to continue is just so valuable. and just letting things settle and ground, and then going back and doing another course at some point in the future, the not too distant future. Wonderful, really wonderful to hear that you've done that. Sadhu. Anybody else like to come in? Any comments, questions? Yeah, Marilyn.
Thank you, Aya. Yeah, when you were talking about the story, the redemptive story, it made me chuckle too. We talk about, oh, I guess anyone can do this. You know.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to ask, if you just talk a little bit about the commentaries, because I'm not totally clear. I thought the commentaries didn't appear in the suttas, or that they were maybe exaggerated, how reliable they are, or are they anecdotal?
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, that's, it's a really good that you asked that, because the commentaries are very ancient, but they're not the words of the Buddha. They're not the original texts. And so it is quite interesting that you get a lot of embellishment, particularly around the most famous stories in the lifetime of the Buddha. There's a lot of embellishment that comes through the commentaries, and it's kind of, once you've read something, it's difficult to forget it and question it too much, because it's so interesting to have this sense of the background story. But I would take it with a kind of grain of salt. Just, personally, I more and more give importance to the original teachings, and anything else I'm kind of just interested, but not, it's not so important for me. What's really important is what we can read in the sutta itself. And it's a sort of bare bones story there. We don't really know how many people this person killed. We don't really know why he was doing what he was doing. We don't really know how the Buddha came to find him, but the Buddha was able to, direct his gaze around his area and see who he felt was capable of appreciating the teachings that the Buddha had to offer. And so it's very interesting that one thing we can say about Angulimala is that the Buddha saw in him this incredible potential. He had this incredible potential, even though he was behaving so terribly. So that's very interesting. The commentaries, some people say that the stories that you hear in the commentaries are often acknowledged to be kind of fabrications, and they're not to be taken seriously, because culturally, in the Buddhist countries at that time, when they were writing all these commentaries, it was perfectly acceptable to make stories up and just throw them in there to kind of celebrate the teachings. And people at the time had the sense that these are not to be taken too seriously. So I think that's a very helpful pointer for us in relation to our kind of the way we take in the commentarial teachings, stories, really. Yeah. I hope that sort of answers your query there, Marilyn. Thank you. Yeah. Anybody else? A little bit of time left, a few minutes. Very good. Okay. I think it would be lovely if we sit together for the last couple of minutes of the evening. Come home. Thanks, everyone.
Good night.